Hi, this is Bob Banner from Phoenix Gathering in Ecuador, and I'm with Chris Shaw, who is also a participant at the Phoenix Gathering. He's the media coordinator and policy analyst for the Work Less Party. So I'm going to ask him some questions about the Work Less Party. So welcome.
Thank you. So what can I tell you about Work Less Party? It was originally started in 2005 at the provincial level. In Canada we have three levels of government, essentially. We have the municipal, of course, provincial, and then the national level. And we started the party. I wasn't involved with them then. I was actually in the Green Party and got recruited from the Greens by the original organizer of the Work Less Party, whose name is Conrad Schmidt. And Conrad had come up with a very different view of how economy should be structured away from hyper-consumption and the mindless capitalist consumption model that much of the world's economy is based on. That is accompanied by endless waste, where people they work harder and longer hours to buy more stuff that ultimately winds up in storage facilities or in landfill. So it is a degradative and ultimately earth-destroying process. And so he started looking at some European models where actually, in many countries, they actually work fewer hours and then have more time for the other social aspects of their lives with their friends, their families, community. And so the Work Less Party started with that idea: if you limit the amount of industrial work you do, you have more time for the more enriching community building activities. And you may have less money, but you also have less need to consume those products that are driving this hyper economy, and are therefore much gentler on the world than any of the other political parties would advocate, even the Greens. So we are actually leaning towards a notion of what we call zero growth, which is true sustainability, that our footprint doesn't expand anymore. In fact, it shrinks, that we cease doing the kinds of economic activities that are so destructive for the planet. And we're looking, a lot of our focus, although it started as a provincial party, we also have a federal branch, simply because we want to be able to contest that when federal elections happen. But most of our focus is really at the civic level, because we have begun to take, I think, the view that was current here at the Phoenix Gathering, that democracy really has to start at the grassroots level, and you start it at the bottom up and work your way upwards. And even the civic sort of structure is almost too big for what we're thinking. So we really organize at the grassroots level and at a block level, and build upwards to actually contest the civic elections, which we're going to do in November 2009.
How many people are sort of involved?
Well, in any organization, membership, we probably have several thousand people on our membership list. Certainly that many people come to our parties, which are wild and crazy parties and full of creative energy and all kinds of performance and music and any number of things like that, because we truly believe that political parties should be fun, and it's not just about the dour gloom and doom stuff, but people should get together as community to have fun. So we do that. So
that's why they call it a party, right?
That's why they call it a party, exactly. The people who actually do the basic work of the party, there are probably about 100 who contribute from time to time. We have a very much that social, I wouldn't call it a social anarchist model, because although that's what it is, but because that's a scary word for a lot of people. But the idea that people will accept the responsibility to do the things that need to be done, and we don't need to delegate, we don't need to create hierarchies to do that. We do many things by what we've talked about here, the kind of the emergent perspective way of doing business. Our meetings are run very much that way, where we discuss issues, try to reach some sort of emergent, you could call it consensus or perspective on how things will occur. And we trust people within those groupings to find the ways to make the actions we want happen, and remarkably, they do.
So you were telling me before that you don't actually expect to win, but this is more like an educational campaign.
Well, it's interesting. In the civic election coming up, we're already being accused of splitting the progressive vote. So we have two answers to that. First is, we don't really think we're splitting any vote for the simple reason that the left and right spectrum is artificial. The second reason is that the conventional notion that the party that captures most of the squishy center is actually the one that's going to win, also requires that those parties dumb down their message to people who arguably aren't informed enough to be in one of the so-called voting blocs. So we don't do that. We use the political party as a means to educate, to give red pill moments to people where they actually are presented with ideas that they haven't thought about before. So, for example, in the 2009 election, we'll be talking about, it's not 2009, November 2008, we'll be talking about zero growth, which none of the other parties will touch. So we will use that platform as a means to say things and present ideas and concepts that the other parties are terrified of saying because they're afraid they'll lose votes. Our secret weapon is we don't care if they vote for us or not. Having said that, we also recognize that only 35% of people in a civic election in Vancouver will ever bother to vote at all, which means that there are 65% who don't. The conventional wisdom is that 65% is simply lazy, or they're hungover and they don't go to the polls because they're spineless jerks. The reality is they don't go to the polls because they don't think they have a choice. And much of that 65% is composed of young people. Our mathematics is that if we can get something like 17% of that 65% to actually come out and vote for what they really want, we'll have won the election. We can elect our 80-year-old grandmother, who is our mayoral candidate, to the mayor's office in Vancouver. And so we combine, first of all, we tell the truth, we talk about the things we think are important, and we look at an entirely different demographic from the conventional demographic. And that applies to some level to both the provincial and federal levels. So we're taking those philosophies forward at all three political domains. But we're starting really intensively now with the civic election, where all of a sudden we're the third party in the city. Because what's happened is one of the candidates for one of the parties has some notional green credentials, and two of the parties that usually are involved in civic elections, the Civic Greens and a party called COPE, have basically said, well, if this fellow runs for this third party, they're going to support him, so they're not even going to run a candidate. So all of a sudden, Workplace Party is the third party of this election, which gives us a lot more visibility. And with our 80-year-old grandmother, whose name is Betty Croswitz, out there saying the things she's saying and speaking passionately about the environment and about zero growth and about community democracy and about dealing in realistic ways with the extremely harsh conditions for many of the people who live in Vancouver. I mean, we have enormous poverty in Vancouver. She actually has the potential to grab not only some of the conventional voters, but a large fraction of that 65% of non-voters. So we think we can actually change the dynamics of that election in very meaningful ways. And even if we don't win, that's still okay. We'll still have educated a lot of people, spread those red pills all over the place, and made a lot of people question a lot of issues that they otherwise would never get exposed to.
So just some simple questions. Work less. Do you actually work less?
Well, the joke in the party is that we all work far too hard. And the answer to, I mean, it really becomes a question of what work is. Is work what you do for your, to make your salary so that you can buy your food and pay your rent? Yes, it is. So many of us work. I'm not one of them, sadly, but many of us do work less hours in the official economy, and devote our time to doing the community building and the party education that we think is important. But we don't consider that work because that's something we love.
Yeah.
And so when we say you work less to live more, so whether that living more is spending time with family or friends or doing community gardening or painting or doing other artistic endeavors or doing political activism that educates other people, we don't really consider that work. We consider that play.
So out of the 100 who are actually doing a lot of the work, what's the average age?
We are a very young party.
Uh-huh.
So
like 30s?
Yeah, 30s, 20s. We have many, and even younger. So I would imagine the average age is probably late 20s.
Oh wow.
You know, Conrad he's a pretty young guy too. Betty is our 80-year-old grandmother candidate. She's one of our older members. I'm heading in that direction, not quite nowhere near that far, but still, you know, more gray hair than most of the people in the party. So it's a young party, and it's a young and it's a young party that, again, is very open to questioning a lot of the received wisdom in the political structure. And it's also the other advantage we really have is it's a young party where people are suspicious of mainstream media and very technologically savvy and look online for much of their information. So much of our campaign is actually going to be web-based, where we're going to go to where young people look for their information these days. And we think we have that as a distinct advantage over the other parties.
Do you know how many hits you're getting per month?
I don't off the top of my head, but I know we get quite a lot, and where we will get more, because, again, we will deliberately go out and find that means of speaking to that untapped demographic.
So if you're not using the mainstream media, what kind of media are you using besides the website?
Well, we do use mainstream media, and you know, I have through various other political endeavors such as the anti-Olympics work, have developed a relationship with a lot of reporters, which is very good. And it's not like Work Less Party gets no coverage. We do get coverage. Some of the mainstream media have already told us that they're not going to cover anything we do. They're simply not going to. They don't want to give us any credibility, and that's okay. We can work around that because, again, we have ways to deal with that. One of them is to create news. We're not just going to beg them to cover what we do. We will go out and be active in on many issues, whether it's Olympic issues, whether it's homeless issues. We will create news, and they can choose to ignore that, but not all the media will.
I guess what I meant was, like, how are you getting the word out to let people know about certain events or actions?
Okay, well, we have an extensive email list. We also do leafleting. We simply go up and down the streets in the areas where our members and others are concentrated. We put leaflets on telephone poles and on other public spots so that people can actually see it. We announce them at different gatherings where we are. The word of mouth phenomenon and is extremely active in the Vancouver activist circles.
So I would imagine if there's a lot of young people, then they're using their social networks.
And they use their social networks, and of course we are allied with any number of political groupings that are involved in social activism for democratic change. So we work with young Native resistance groups. We work with something called the Anti-Poverty Committee. We work with half a dozen, the World Naked Bike Ride, the Critical Fusion bike folks. So we have an enormous web of social connections, and through them we spread our message as well. So many of those people who are not necessarily Work Less Party members will come to our events or are aware of our events simply because we have that network.
So I have to ask, so tell us more about the Naked World Bike Ride and how that is drawing attention or getting negative attention, or how is it working?
Again, the World Naked Bike Ride, at least in Vancouver, draws a lot of attention. As you can imagine, Vancouver is a pretty free city in the sense of being tolerant for different kinds of things. And so when people all of a sudden strip off their clothes and get on their bikes and drive down a main street, we certainly draw a lot of attention. And I think it's designed as it's an agitprop event. It's designed to raise the issue of our car culture and the alternatives to our car culture, and I think it successfully does that. And it's actually become a bit of an institution in Vancouver. People expect to see the naked bike ride occur in a certain day.
So was it always legal, or was there a problem in the very beginning?
There was never a problem with it. The police in Vancouver tend to. It depends who you are, of course. With a bunch of mostly at this stage, white middle class activists, they're really not going to come down too heavily on people riding their bikes naked. I mean, if one person did it, they might arrest them. But when you've got a 50 or 100 people doing it, they're less likely to intervene simply because they don't want to create an incident, which they would. And we don't look for confrontation with the police. We simply exert our rights as citizens to be able to use our own streets for our own purpose. And if we have our clothes on or not, that's fine.
A more serious question. This week, You heard Michael talking about relocalization, and you had mentioned that you may want to incorporate that into the Work Less Party because of its value in creating a sustainable world. Can you talk a little bit more about
Certainly.
that?
We are, as a party and as individuals and as the different activist groups that we belong to, are very concerned with the state of the biosphere, what human civilization has done, and the hierarchical and economic structures that exist in the world have done to make it worse, and have begun to seriously contemplate the notion of what we call food security. And food security is one of the issues of relocalization. So the question is, how do we make Vancouver self-sustainable? And a lot of our thinking is not only going into the democratic governance that would have to occur to make that happen, but how can we help Vancouverites prepare for what are going to be difficult times ahead. And it's hard in a large city, but you know the structure that we've talked about here of going down to the most basic level. You're talking first to families, and then to blocks, then blocks into districts, and then districts into larger regions of the city. That's the way we see building it. That's the way we're trying to build the party, and that's the way we're trying to encourage people to think at the most grassroots level and then upwards. And out of that come things like community gardens. Out of that thing comes things like mutual aid for any number of potential disasters that might occur. How people are going to get their food, how they're going to manage their transportation, how they're going to do their. We're even thinking of alternative currencies and banking, and that will be all part of what we bring forward to the population. And ultimately, how we reduce our footprint to as close to zero as possible.
I'm just curious, being here for a week at the Phoenix Gathering, has that influenced you or altered any of your views around Work Less Party or around your initial impulse to work for sustainability?
Well, it's certainly given me a lot of new ideas, and I had heard about the relocalization movement and knew a little bit about it, but I've learned a great deal more. Certainly in terms of governance, the discussions we had here with the groups that were involved in governance were extremely helpful as I begin to crystallize my own ideas. And so when I go back to Vancouver, I'll be able to take many of the ideas that we had expressed here and bring them forward to the group as a structure for how we raise these very topics with the electorate in the election in November. And it's kind of given me the skeleton of what I think will be the platform. Because before we were arguing about the platform, what it would look like, what it would be the elements. I think what I'm coming away from here is basically the framework for that platform. In other words, that one-page document we can hand out to people on the street saying, here's what we believe, here's what we're going to work for, and that will serve as the nucleus for a larger way of thinking about all the problems that Vancouver as a unique community has at its different levels. I think I mentioned that we have just ghastly poverty in the city of Vancouver. There are something like 3,000 to 7,000 homeless people more all the time. One of the districts of the city, called the Downtown East Side, has some of the worst rates of infectious disease, including HIV, hepatitis, meningitis, you name it, drug addiction. It is called Canada's poorest postal code.
So what would you do as a political party if you won?
What would we do? We would.
I mean, specifically for the homeless and what you were just talking about.
Well, we would be talking about looking at a community-based plan for that area, where the people who live in that community would start to come up with their own solutions, and our goal would be to find ways to economic ways to support that relocalization of that community as a beginning. That community is a very rich artistic and cultural mosaic. The resources, economic resources don't exist, but those can be found. And some of the things we learned here about ethical banking and how to create banking and monetary structures that work for people instead of institutions might well be incorporated there. The idea that you start by empowering the people in that area to make the decisions in their lives, and then find the resources to enable them to carry those ideas forward, would be, I think, the most positive thing we could do. We could do in that district, rather than the city dictating what's going to happen there. The city should allow that sort of grassroots upwelling of ideas and governance and financial structures to occur. And I think that what I come away from here is the notion that that's doable. And we've already identified ways we can find money that is being spent on. Let me give you an example. The current idea of how to deal with the problems of the downtown east side and the burgeoning crime rate is to hire more police officers. And in other words, to police the problem to pieces. And of course that never works. It hasn't worked anywhere, certainly not going to work in Vancouver. And our idea is, well, we would actually talk about reducing the police budget and putting police back into a community level policing, and actually take away, they don't need the high-tech stuff. They don't need armored cars to deal with the downtown east side. That money is better spent allowing the people in that community to find their own ways to create a viable community. And so the money exists. It's just a question of how to reallocate it. And as a party in power, we would certainly find ways to reallocate the money to enable that democratic governance and the corresponding creativity, both economic and social, to occur in that area that would allow the people to get themselves out of the poverty in which they live, rather than us telling them how they're going to do it.
Just a few more minutes. Give us the website for the Work Less Party.
It's www.worklessparty.org.
Okay.
I hope.
I'm sure we'll find it if
it's on my browser, and I tend not to.
So one last question.
Yeah.
You've written a book about the Olympics.
I did. I wrote a book on.
Can you tell us briefly about that book and what's happening in 2010?
I wrote a book called Five Ring Circus. It shares a title with a movie of the same name that was Conrad Schmidt's documentary movie on the Olympics. And it started with my own path of discovery, my own red pill moment, when I realized that the Olympics was not a benevolent organization designed to use sports for peaceful purposes, but rather that at the international level it was a collection of oligarchs who, the IOC, that markets sports and athletes as a product in order to sell television rights, from which they make an enormous profit and on which they pay no taxes anywhere on the planet, including in Switzerland. And that at the local level, everything the Olympics is there to do is to drive the real estate market. And all the people behind the initial bid for the games and behind the running of the games are essentially real estate developers who see in the Olympics a means to get their private projects funded by the public. So it's a giant, what we call a P3, a private-public partnership, where the public assumes all the financial risk and the private sector reaps all the rewards. And all the people get, if they get anything, is a party that lasts 17 days. And that costs an enormous amount of money. So the estimate in Vancouver, these are our estimates because the government disputes them, but the government is hardly transparent, that is going to cost Canadians, British Columbians, Vancouverites about $6 billion. That's a lot of money. And when you think of the waste of that money on a party that would do so much other good, whether it would be in medical research or in the downtown east side or in dealing with outstanding native and Aboriginal issues in our country. And our Aboriginals, First Nations, live in most cases under conditions of fairly dire poverty. That money is not trivial. In my world of neurological disease research, $1 billion would probably cure any neurological disease you want to name. And so that money, that it could be used purely for real estate speculators, is quite offensive. So the book talks about all those different issues.
I'm curious, there's so much greenwashing happening. I'm wondering if this Olympic game is talking about green stuff and how valid is that?
Well, yeah, they proudly proclaim themselves the greenest games ever. And as they were doing so, they proceeded to cut down somewhere between 40 and 100,000 trees, much of it old growth. They set in motion the destruction of unique habitat, a place called Eagle Ridge, and another place called the Callahan Valley, where there were endangered species. They are probably going to emit something along the lines of 3.5 megatons of carbon dioxide, which is the equivalent of 5% of British Columbia's total annual output. So 5%, that number is greater than some 70 countries on the planet emit yearly. And so we're doing that for a party. And at the same time, our government is saying that they want to go carbon neutral and they want to reduce reduce emissions, and yet they're allowing this party to go ahead and actually increase the problem, not decrease it. And so the Olympics and the local branch of the Olympics are crowing about how green they are, and in fact they're anything besides.
And the book and the DVD gets into this.
The book and the DVD get into this. We also talk in the book about the security situation. The security situation comes at enormous expense. 3 levels of government, including the American government, by the way, are involved in providing Olympic security, and that is a huge expense for any Olympic Games. We're estimating it's going to be at least $1 billion, probably more. Again, money spent defending a party, and that what comes with that not only is the expense, but the loss of civil liberties, because when that kind of security apparatus descends on your city, in order to protect that party, they also start surveilling. They're talking about having surveillance cameras with face recognition software everywhere, so they can identify the activists, they can identify people they're worried about. They're talking about, they've already talked about preventative arrests. They've talked about widespread surveillance in general. So we expect to see a significant impact on civil liberties that often don't go away after the games have gone, and that might become a permanent feature of our lives. And so we're certainly concerned with that, and various civil liberties groups have expressed their concerns about the ongoing future and long-term impacts of the security apparatus in Vancouver.
And the DVD is called the same name as the book?
DVD is called Five Ring Circus as well. And we decided a long time ago, when Conrad was first thinking of making a movie, he said, I think I'll make a movie, and I had been discussing making a book, and I said, I'll make a book, and said, let's call it the same thing. And they will reinforce each other, and they have done that.
Sort of like the corporation,
yes,
when the two
very much,
people came together.
And Conrad is emerging as a very talented documentary filmmaker, and that's his skill set. My skill set is more in wordsmithing, and so we chose different paths to pretty much the same goal, and they reach overlapping audiences, which is what we hope.
Yeah, we actually showed his the World Naked Bike Ride, and it was very much fun. And some of the people in San Luis Obispo decided that they were going to do a naked bike ride because of that film.
I should mention that Conrad is doing a new film, which should come out this month, and it's called Workers of the World Relax.
Oh, well, that was going to be my next question, because he wrote a book.
That's right. Conrad has written a great book called Workers of the World Relax: The Simple Economics of Less Industrial Work, which is out.
Would that be considered like a manifesto of the Work-Less Party?
Very much it is.
Okay.
Very much it is. And so he's now gone and interviewed people all throughout North America and Western Europe. I think George Monbiot is in it, and quite a few others, and some of the activists in France. And that movie will come out soon, and I think it's going to be a great way of pushing our vision and the vision of other people around the world out to a much wider audience.
Great. On that note, thank you very much, Chris Shaw, for spending some time.
My pleasure, Bob.
Okay.